Hello and welcome to News Desk. I'm Alex Forrest Whiting.
And I'm Jared Reid.
Now, the US and China are the world's two biggest polluters, but they've also become two big players in the transition to green energy. Now, though, they're taking very different paths. The Trump administration has attacked global climate action as a con job and is doubling down on fossil fuels. China, meanwhile, is dominating the clean tech sector and investing heavily in renewables for both domestic use and for export abroad.
And we have a really good example to show you. Just look at this enormous solar park that China is building on the Tibetan Plateau. It is a whopping 419 square kilometres big. Just to give you a bit of context, that's around 7 times the size of Manhattan. I don't think I've ever seen so many solar panels in my life.
That is incredible. And, of course, that's just one example.
Yeah.
So we thought that this week we would just look at this whole issue and the global energy tug-of-war. Who is winning, how and why?
And some of you have already been weighing in on this discussion with comments on our community post on YouTube that went up yesterday. Capella has written in, the truth is no one, especially superpowers, cares about climate and environment. They only want to dominate in every field, not just in clean energy, according to Capella. M is saying China invests heavily in fossil fuels and nuclear, but uses green energy where appropriate, which helps the entire grid become more robust, makes the slow progress of technology development with green energy much less painful for the energy market. That's according to M. And Yukon is saying it's a climate hoax. China produces more carbon than the rest of the world and is building a coal plant every week. That is something we are going to be talking about a bit later on.
Some great comments there. Thank you very much, Jared. And maybe a good moment then to bring in our first guest, because we are joined by DW's Chief Climate Reporter, Louise Osborne. Great to have you here.
Hey.
You're going to be helping us understand the whole context, and particularly about China, where you've been looking at it in quite some detail. But just picking up on those comments then, and that comment from one person saying it's a hoax because China is still a massive polluter and is building still coal power plants. That's true, isn't it?
It's completely true. I mean, China is the largest emitter. It emits more greenhouse gases than any other country. Around a third of all greenhouse gases come from China. And there has been a huge momentum on building new coal power plants. It's a major source of electricity for the country still. And I read a crazy statistic, actually, from the International Energy Agency that was saying 1 in every 4 tons of coal that is used globally is burned in China to make electricity. So it is a huge consumer of coal still.
Yeah.
But it is also driving forward momentum on renewables in a way that no other country is. And I think that's something we're going to come back to later.
Definitely.
Definitely. Thanks.
Yeah, and you did just have something just very quickly to share on the laptop, if we've got time, of just how much these coal-powered plants, or how many are being built each year.
Exactly. So we can see here China's construction of new coal power plants, which reached a 10-year high in 2024. We can see, of course, it dipped around the time of the pandemic, but then definitely has sprung right back up. That's definitely a really interesting statistic about China's construction of new coal power plants as it really pushes forward with more renewable energy. Thanks so much for that, Louise. We also, we're going to be joined a little bit later on in the discussion by Rachel Cleetus, Dr. Rachel Cleetus. She's at the UN climate change conference known as COP30. I'm sure many of you have heard of that this week. Rachel is Senior Policy Director with the Climate and Energy Program at an organisation called the Union of Concerned Scientists. Really interesting group of people there. So we're looking forward to digging into this issue with a concerned scientist.
Yeah, and we will certainly be asking her what they actually do at that organisation as well, so why they are concerned. So that will be something that we will put to her as soon as we speak to her.
Yeah, and before we do that, though, let's introduce Dustin Hemmerlein. He is helping me monitor the chat today. Dustin, how's it going? You've got a poll for us today.
Yes, I do. Hi, everyone. Yeah, I do have a poll for you guys. I will be in the chat, so if you have any questions, put them in the chat. I'll forward them to our experts and to the table. The poll today is, how do you feel about China as a climate leader? And the options to answer are, I'm glad they are stepping up. We shouldn't depend on China. They are still the biggest polluter. And the last one, the US needs to be involved. You will find the poll on top of the chat. And yeah, I'm excited to see what you guys are thinking, hear what you guys are thinking in the chat. And then, yeah, we'll announce the poll result at the end.
Great, thank you very much for that. So before we sort of get going, I just want to ask you then, Louise, just with this whole issue of climate and discussion over energy, why does it matter so much? What really is at stake in all this?
I mean, we've seen over the years that the world is heating up. In 2024, we had the hottest ever temperatures that we had seen. Global temperatures have reached 1.3 to 1.4 degrees above pre-industrial levels, and we're seeing the impact of that. Extreme weather has become a really big problem in many parts of the world. I mean, we saw the hurricanes that devastated parts of Jamaica, for example. We've seen a surge in heat-related death in Europe. The wildfires that we saw at the beginning of this year that decimated parts of LA. So we're really seeing the impact of the changes that are happening to our climate. And the reality is that countries are having to think about how they're going to move away from fossil fuels, because burning fossil fuels is what is causing this crisis in the first place. We have seen some climate goals put forward by these countries, but they are still not going far enough to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees, which is what scientists have said is kind of the highest that we can go. I mean, as you said before, the COP30 is now taking place in Belém, and this is a huge discussion.
Place itself, right?
It's actually going to be the second hottest place on Earth at some point in the future, scientists are saying. And the goals that have been put in place by countries at the moment would lead to warming of 2.6 degrees at least, or around that figure.
Over that 1.5 then.
Well, yeah, I mean, imagine all the things that we are seeing already. What is that going to be like if we're another degree higher? It's going to be devastating. It's going to mean, you know, costing millions, billions of lives. And so it is hugely important for people to be thinking how we can stop this from happening. And so the energy question is a huge question, because obviously, you know, we all have the way that we live, we have all of the things that we've become used to, having lights on in our houses and things like this, and we don't want that to stop. But at the same time, we can't keep going forward in the way that we've been going forward until now.
And yet, you know, we can't ignore the fact that there is a lot of scepticism about this. There's certainly been a lot of backtracking from countries. We only need to look at what's been happening in the United States with the administration there, clearly pulling back from the whole talk about renewables and really pushing fossil fuels. You know, why have we got to that situation, given what you've said, what scientists have been saying for years and years and years, just how serious this is?
I mean, I think there's a lot of concern about the economy, for example. You know, there are many industries, for example, that will find it difficult to move forwards without fossil fuels. Thinking concrete, for example, steel that needs certain temperatures to be able to make those products. And so, you know, renewables have not always been able to fill that gap until now. These are, you know, known as hard to abate areas where carbon dioxide is an unfortunate kind of byproduct of those industries as well. And so it's difficult then to think about how to move away from that. I think there's also this concern about, you know, this loss of our livelihood the way that we have been living until now. And, there are some people who, as we mentioned before, President Donald Trump, who just don't believe that climate change is a big issue and who think that, the steps going towards would, not benefit the economy or the US people in the way that scientists say it would.
And yet we know that there is this big battle that has been going on over renewables, and that some countries are really taking a lead in this. And we're going to talk about China in a moment. But first of all, we did have just a graph that we wanted to show, which is the comparison. Maybe you can explain it, Jared.
Yeah, exactly. So this is basically showing us where our operating power facilities located. We're comparing non-fossil power capacities, those under construction, and those of fossil fuels. And we have, I guess it's about roughly double, right? It looks like at the moment, roughly there are around the world double the amount of non-fossil power facilities being constructed as opposed to ones that are for fossil fuels.
So that's where the money seems to be going then at the moment, certainly.
Exactly. We can see, though, the fossil fuels, we can see where they're located, and we can see a whole lot of red. So that does show us that there is still an awful lot of fossil fuel plants around the world, as Louise is saying, but perhaps a constructive, positive note to say is that almost double the amount are being constructed at the moment. So, yeah.
Great. So I wanted to talk about then focusing on China to start with, because as I said at the beginning, you spent a lot of time researching China in the whole area of renewables and green tech, etc. Just how big a player is China now?
I mean, I think it's hard to express how big a player it is because it's huge in comparison to any other country in the world. Last year alone, they invested $625 billion in clean tech, which is vastly more than any other country. They produce 85% of solar panels, for example. They dominate the electric vehicle market, the battery market, and they are making a huge footprint then in emerging countries that are looking to also move into renewables and to take that on as their energy access. So they are a huge player in this market. And
we've got another graph. We've got lots of graphs. There were so many graphs, by the way, out there that we could have spent this whole hour or whatever just looking at different graphs. But we've got one. It wasn't that one, actually.
Wasn't it this one? Okay.
I've skipped that one. This one, which just shows when you're saying these numbers, which is kind of difficult to compute, that just shows where China is
look how far ahead China is right now compared, 4 times as far ahead as the next country, which is the US.
Yeah, it's phenomenal, isn't it?
You can see Germany looks like in number 5. Yeah.
Yeah. So we saw also those pictures of that huge solar panel farm that's being built on the Tibetan plateau, which is just phenomenal to look at. And again, it's difficult to kind of get your head around how big it is. Is it true that Chinese solar panels are now the cheapest source of energy? That's what I had read.
Yes, yeah, they are. I mean, in sunny countries, for example, research has shown that per unit of power, it costs 0.0 euro cents for solar energy. So it's really, really low, and production costs have fallen significantly. And this is in large part because of China, because they are producing panels to the degree that they are producing them. The costs have fallen significantly in terms of like the tech advancements that have taken place over the last few years, and also the manufacturing efficiencies that they've been able to put in place since they've been developed.
And these are just some of the pictures now that we are showing of some of those, well, these are solar panels, but some of those farms across China, and you can see they're in different parts of the country, aren't they? It's not like it's just in one place, and that's what's so extraordinary, just how vast they are, how they seem to have this space and determination to keep building and keep building.
Yeah, I mean, all of these fields, and like we said before, it's not just China. I mean, they are exporting this technology as well so that it can be used all over the world. And so, you know, solar parks, wind power plants are springing up in so many places as a result of this technology getting cheaper and easier to install.
Did you have anything interesting that was in the chat yet? I know I'm making you work very hard today.
I am. That's fine. That's fine. I'm all over the place. No, we are. I mean, you were sort of. This is a little bit off topic, so maybe we don't necessarily need to go down here. But you're talking about how far ahead China is, which obviously connotates like a reliance on China for this type of technology. Someone is asking how we end a reliance on China for these types of technologies. Someone is suggesting, can we form blocks for sustainable electric distribution? That's one idea. We're constructive here at Newsdesk. Do you have anything to? Could you have anything to say about that, like the reliance on China for these types of renewable energy technologies?
Because the US has been criticised in the past for the opposite, hasn't it?
Yeah.
And now it's trying.
I mean, I think it is a big concern. I mean, the EU has talked about this as well. You know, the supply chains that are involved then in getting everything from China. I mean, you know, President Donald Trump has tried to stop this to some degree with his trade tariffs, right? Putting in place tariffs on things that will be brought into the country. Yeah, I think that there are other ways that countries are trying to tackle this so that they can make an industry also for themselves.
Right.
I mean, I know this is, like I said, a concern for the EU and something that they would like to be building up so that, I mean, there isn't a reliance on China, but also so that they can kind of take a piece of that pie and make it a part of their economy to a larger extent as well.
It's interesting because I mean, this is a little bit off topic, but we had a summit in Berlin this week talking about digital sovereignty and how the EU wants to become more digitally sovereign. And I guess it also wants to become a little bit more sovereign in terms of how its own technologies when it comes to renewable energies as well.
I want to continue talking about China, but we've actually got our next guest on the line. It'd be great to bring her in. It's Dr. Rachel Cleetus from the Union of Concerned Scientists. Really good to have you here. We know that you are in Brazil at the moment at that COP30 huge conference. So we're very grateful that you could take the time out to join us for this discussion. We are talking about China at the moment, and I do want to talk to you also about the US and where they stand at the moment with the Trump administration. Just before we continue with that discussion about China, maybe you could just explain to us what the Union of Concerned Scientists is, because you are Senior Policy Director with the Climate and Energy Programme there. But just so people are absolutely clear, what is that union?
Thank you so much for having me here from COP. The Union of Concerned Scientists is a 55-year-old science-based advocacy organization. We do all our work based from facts, from science, and I work in the Climate and Energy Program, where climate science is the basis through which we do our policy development and advocacy. And our goal is very simple. That science belongs to all of us. And when the public is aware of the best available science, they can advocate for policies that will help protect their health, protect their well-being. And this venue here at COP and Berlin is one of those very important moments where science has to matter.
So what is the mood like there at the moment? What's it like as you're walking around?
Well, we came into this COP with a pretty sobering set of scientific facts that the world is on the verge of reaching the cherished 1.5 C mark. That amount of global warming, of course, means that we're locking in some pretty significant further worsening climate impacts, many of them irreversible. So the job here at COP was to make sure that countries recognize that fact and raise their ambition as the Paris Agreement calls for. The mood here is still, I would say, relatively positive, but we're coming into the final crunch time here, and we still have some vast gulfs between countries in terms of getting a really successful outcome. One bright spot has been a call from over 80 countries for a transition away from fossil fuels. They want a roadmap secured here at Beijing. And yesterday we saw a lot of ministers from many, many countries, including Germany, the Marshall Islands, Kenya, many others, speaking up and saying, this is what we need. This is what people on the ground need. This is what the science shows is necessary to tackle the climate crisis.
But of course, there's one big country that's missing from those talks, and that's the United States. A decision by the Trump administration not to go there. You know, we know that there, for example, well, we saw when we were looking through all the pictures from the COP30 conference that there is even a chair that says United States, but it's obviously there's nobody sitting in it. I just want to get an idea from you about how significant that has been. Obviously, you are based in the US. Has that been a blow that the Trump administration has taken the decision to boycott it, or perhaps it's been a blessing in disguise?
Well, frankly, I have to say that people here are largely relieved that the Trump administration did not show up. They have been so destructive, anti-climate, anti-science. They've been trying to upend global multilateral diplomacy across the board. So frankly, they would not have been a good presence here. But that said, this is the first time the United States has not sent an official federal government delegation here to COP. And that is a very sobering, shameful moment. The United States is still, on a cumulative basis, the largest contributor to global heat trapping emissions. It's the world's richest country. It has to play a key role in how we tackle the climate crisis. So this is a lost opportunity, but it's crucial to completely isolate and sideline the Trump administration and have the rest of the countries here forge ahead to get an outcome that everybody wants here at Beijing.
We have Rachel, it's Jared Reid here. We've got some comments about the role of the US. When it comes to COP, if the US isn't there, given its role, you were saying everyone else can bandy together and do the best they can, but is there a point to a gathering like this if the US is not present?
Well, it's regrettable that the US is not here, but we have 190 plus countries here. We have many major economies. We have small island nations that are the moral voice of the world in terms of being on the front lines of the climate crisis as they lose land. We have countries like the Philippines here that has just endured back-to-back terrible climate-fueled typhoons. So we have many, many people here representing those on the front lines of the crisis and countries that are eager for a rapid transition to clean, renewable energy. So the rest of the world hopes that the US will be back in the fold before too long, but they cannot wait because the climate crisis is urgent and they will move ahead and hope we catch up.
Let me just remind people who are watching or listening to what Donald Trump has said about climate change, about renewables, about clean energy over the past years, including over the past few months. Let's just have a listen.
But I'm immediately withdrawing from the unfair, one-sided Paris Climate Accord ripoff. We have more energy than anybody else, and it's clean energy, very clean, beautiful energy. We're lucky. We have it. I call it liquid gold under our feet, and we're going to utilize it. And we will drill, baby, drill. We're slashing unnecessary regulations that targeted the beautiful, clean coal. We're going to try and have a policy where no windmills are being built. It's climate change, because if it goes higher or lower, whatever the hell happens, there's climate change. It's the greatest con job ever perpetrated on the world, in my opinion.
Rachel, when you hear those comments from the President of the United States, how does it make you feel?
Well, the first thing I want to say is nothing he said, none of those lies changed the facts about the climate science and the climate reality that people are experiencing around the world. The facts are clear. It's our emissions from burning fossil fuels accumulating in the atmosphere that are setting off increasingly dire, costly, harmful climate impacts around the world. It doesn't matter where you live. You've seen the heat waves, the wildfires, the floods, the intensified storms. This is real. So their lies, their disinformation doesn't change that reality. But what it does do is leave a lot of people on the front lines of the arms without a government that seems to even care about the well-being of its constituents, of its citizens in the United States. So this is deeply harmful because these impacts are happening in the United States as they are in the world. And meanwhile, they've been gutting clean energy policies across the board. Clean energy policies and investments that were delivering jobs, economic benefits, health benefits, in addition to tackling the climate crisis. So that's the first thing about the facts. The facts are very clear here. But the second piece of this that I want people to understand is we are living, unfortunately, in the United States in an increasingly authoritarian environment. This government is clamping down hard, breaking laws, lying about the science. They've weaponized the Department of Justice. They are canceling contracts around clean energy that really violate what a market-based economy is all about, where you have clear rules and regulations. They have people installed in every part of the administration that are spreading similar lies and disinformation. So it's a pretty dangerous environment in the United States right now. And unfortunately, I think this is a moment where everybody has to recognize that this is not going to go away on its own. That's why organizations like mine, like the Union of Concerned Scientists, we're out there calling out the harms. We're out there calling out the harms to people's lives. And we are trying to set the facts straight. We've seen scientists across the board, whether it's public health or climate or education, they're speaking out because they understand that this administration is really overreaching. This is beyond the pale. This is not ordinary politics.
Rachel, I'm wondering, I mean, it's a bit of a, obviously, justifiably grim picture that you're painting here, but I wonder if there are possibly any upsides to this. We've had a comment in the chat from Nile, who is saying the US rolling back policies favouring green tech and renewable energies won't limit the green transition, but will accelerate green technology leadership in Asia and Europe. The US pullback also won't reverse structural renewable growth. Do you have any input to that?
Absolutely, I completely agree. Nothing this administration does can change the facts that renewable energy is often the cheapest form of energy to install. We're seeing wind, solar, battery storage costs come down double digits year on year. The latest IEA World Energy Outlook report is just the latest to show how renewables are just expanding dramatically around the world. In the United States, that momentum is being affected by the Trump administration because they're simultaneously boosting fossil fuels, canceling clean energy contracts and investments. But there's no stopping this clean energy revolution that's happening around the world. The opportunity here, though, in the United States is that a lot of state and local jurisdictions, a lot of forward-looking businesses are absolutely in it. They understand the opportunity. They've been here at top. It's been incredible to see Governor Newsom, Governor Lujan Grisham, Senator Whitehouse, many state and local business representatives show up to say, we're still in. We understand the benefits of a clean energy transition. We're going to double down and continue to expand this. And we're going to create jobs. We're going to clean up the pollution that comes from fossil fuels. And we're going to do this in a way that delivers benefits for people. Ordinary people want to see their energy costs come down. And everything the Trump administration is doing is actually raising those costs. It's increasing pollution, dirtying our air and water, as well as driving climate change.
I want to, in a moment, play something from Gavin Newsom he was at the conference last week at COP30 in Brazil. Before that, though, you wanted to say something, Louise. Louise Osborne, who's with our DW Environment Department.
Hi, Rachel. I just had a question. It's really great about the positive developments that you were talking about. I was just wondering, though, if there is a concern about the impact of President Trump's actions in other nations and also the influence that the administration is having. I mean, for example, at the International Maritime Organization, his administration or the representatives there were accused of bullying tactics to hold back the negotiations. And I was wondering, if there is any concern about that, and whether they are having, well, whether there's any kind of outside influence on the negotiations taking place in Belém themselves at the moment.
What happened at the IMO negotiations is reprehensible. The rest of the world was moving ahead with a very common sense treaty that they were going to put into implementation. And the United States, behind the scenes, bullied so many countries and stopped it in its tracks. For now, though, it's not over. The negotiations have been punted for another year. But that describes in a nutshell the tactics that this administration is using, the authoritarian tactics. And I think it's really important for the rest of the world and for people in the United States who care about democratic norms to stand up to that. Multilateralism and collaboration, cooperation is key to solving global challenges like climate change. And this kind of behavior shouldn't be condoned. So it's really important in this moment for people within the United States and for other countries to stand up for what's necessary in this moment. Obviously, there's a great deal of concern. That's why people were worried about them coming here to COP30 and trying to mess up the proceedings. But let's just remember again, there are 190 plus countries still committed to the Paris Agreement, whereas the US is the only country that has shamefully withdrawn twice. So this yo-yo behavior is very typical, unfortunately, of the United States, and it needs to be just ignored, sidelined, while the rest of the world goes ahead.
Of course, difficult, isn't it, to sideline and ignore the United States, and very difficult to ignore Donald Trump. We did there just mention Gavin Newsom, that's California's governor, who was at the conference last week. Hasten just to add that he, of course, is a Democrat. He spoke about China because, of course, this discussion is not just about the United States, but it's also about the global powers now and China really stepping in to this whole space of renewable energies and doing extremely well out of it, it appears, and dominating many of the sectors, including solar. So Gavin Newsom was saying that he was very open about the threat to US interests from China. Let's just have a listen to what he had to say.
I'm here in the absence of leadership from Donald Trump, who's abdicated responsibility on a critical issue. I'm here to show up on behalf of my country. I'm here to showcase California's leadership, dominance in the low-carbon green growth space. I'm here because I think it's more than electric power, it's about economic power, and I'm not going to cede America's economic leadership to China.
So there, Gavin Newsom saying he will not cede America's economic leadership to China, which is obviously a very strong comment. I'll just bring Louise back in here. You know, what does he mean by that? Do you think that people like Gavin Newsom and others are seeing this now as a race with China because China is dominating the space?
I mean, it's hard to see it as a race when, as we saw in the graphic before, how far China is already ahead. But, I mean, obviously, renewables would mean a huge amount of economic input. I mean, in China, renewables accounted for 10% of the GDP last year. It drove a quarter of the growth as well. So, you know, for the US to be stepping out of that race and not be a part of that, you know, trying to make the most of that market seems a little bit crazy to some degree. But, you know, I mean, coming from Gavin Newsom as well, I mean, California is the fourth biggest economy in the world, if you kind of take it separately. So there is a lot that California and other states in the US can do, regardless of what the federal government wants to do anyway. And maybe Rachel can...
Yeah, Rachel, Dr. Rachel Cleetus from the Union of Concerned Scientists. I'd love to get your take on that as well. Gavin Newsom is saying that he doesn't want to cede control to China. Do you think that America is making, you know, has removed itself from the game now?
Not yet. I don't think so at all. There is a lot of progress around renewable energy in the United States. Solar power, solar PV, battery storage is taking off in the US as it is around the world because it's so cheap. And places like California are one of the places where we're seeing this incredible progress also around electric vehicles. Texas, Red State, incredible producer of wind power. The Midwest, another area where we're seeing coal plants being retired and being replaced with renewables and battery storage. The challenge in the United States is we're seeing a tremendous build out of fossil gas infrastructure, and that is a real threat to our climate goals. But what I will say about this moment is we absolutely can, through state and local policies and continued investments by forward-looking businesses, maintain the US's space in renewable energy. But I want to shift the frame a little bit. This is not a race that's a zero-sum game. When you think about where the world is today, still primarily dependent on fossil fuels, we've got a huge opportunity here to expand renewables everywhere in the world. And in the lowest income countries, it's about just giving people energy access for the first time. Many, many people, millions of people around the world don't even have access to modern forms of energy. So this transition that we're fighting for here at COP is not a zero-sum competitive one country against the other. It's about collectively trying to solve this challenge. And one of the phrases here that we heard from a Chinese negotiator sticks with me. He used the phrase patient money. And that's really important. When you think about what it's taken to get China to where they are right now, it's over 20 years of really staying the course, whereas the US has been yo-yoing. When we've invested, the United States has expanded tremendously. And under the Biden administration, the Inflation Reduction Act was one of those opportunities to build manufacturing here, to create jobs all across the country. That's the kind of investment we need to make. The investment that stays, the investment that understands the long game here.
Yeah, but as you yourself said earlier, that the Trump administration has been pulling funding from many of these renewable energy projects. I mean, there was a huge project that was meant to be carried out, a solar farm in Nevada, which has been pulled, and there are other examples as well. So how do you counter that when that is what your federal government is doing, even with the best will in the world from leaders, from California's leader, Gavin Newsom, and others? Basically, it comes down to the administration that's in power, and at the moment, they don't like this whole debate at all, and they are absolutely pushing for the fossil fuel.
You know, what's really interesting is there's a lot of pushback from red states, from Republicans as well, because some of these investments were in red states where they were creating jobs, where factories were being built. This attack on offshore wind, so some of the other projects that have come under attack, is actually an attack on a market-based economy, because those were contracts that were already had already moved forward, permits that had already been allocated. And now to create that market uncertainty, that's a black eye on the United States. It's not just about renewable energy. A lot of investors are going to look at this and say, well, why would I put all that money there if it can be yanked? But many of these decisions are being challenged in courts, and the Trump administration is losing because they're doing unlawful things. I think this is one of those moments where, unfortunately, we're not going to see the huge potential being achieved, but we're going to absolutely see the line being held and people continuing to push. This administration is a lost cause. They're not going to be the people who are climate champions, but many, many other people are picking up the mantle and doing everything they can to hold the line.
We've had a question in our chat, someone saying, are we saying it's a battle between business and the environment? Someone says, yes, it's always been a battle between business and the environment, but based on what you're saying, Rachel Cleetus, we should add politics to that as well.
I don't think this is business against the environment, because in fact, what we're seeing is green energy is good business. It's a tremendous good business. If you look at it, we've got trillions of dollars now in the world economy that's going towards clean energy. The story you just told about China, that's a story about smart business decisions. It's about a growth opportunity. It's about seeing a space to expand a kind of technology that is going to be the cutting edge, instead of being trapped in the fossil fuel economy of the past, trapped in the pollution of the past. So I think this is a win-win for the economy, for people's health, and for climate. But we have an administration that is acting absolutely at odds with the interests of the American people, let alone the rest of the world.
I just wanted to, I completely agree with what Rachel is saying there. And I think that actually the key to this is security. And one of the things that China can offer is stability. And businesses need to know that there is a way forward with renewables so that they can make those investments into that future rather than being torn between, are we going down the fossil fuel route or are we going down the non-fossil fuel route? And having that security there would allow for more investment and more movement forward economically with these businesses.
I mean, it does help, doesn't it, that China does not have to change governments every 4 or 5 years. So that certainly makes a difference. But, you know, just talking, sticking with this, the topic of China, Rachel, we've been looking at some of the numbers. We were breaking them down with Louise. They're quite phenomenal. What do you think their green tech dominance really means for the world? I know we've talked now about stability, but the fact that so much now is coming from China. It seems to have, it's totally overtaken any other country. We were looking at some of the graphs earlier.
Bring that up
we can bring it up again. The European Union, for example, used to be in the game and doesn't appear to be now because everything is being dwarfed by China, which, of course, is got a fantastic domestic market, but also is dominating the export market as well.
Well, I'd encourage us to think about how they got here. And every country can do that. You can actually invest in the supply chains. You can invest back home. You can build the transmission. China is not just investing in their own country. They're also selling and deploying in other parts of the world. And Carbon Brief did an analysis where they said China is contributing to as much as 1% decrease in heat trapping emissions around the world because of its deployment of clean tech around the world. So this is, again, I really want to avoid these frames like dominance and zero-sum thinking because it's getting us trapped in these dead ends where we think that the enemy is China or the EU or something else. The enemy is fossil fuels. The enemy is the fossil fuel industry. We didn't get here by accident in the United States. That fossil fuel industry is now running our government practically. Those deep-pocketed interests are spreading misinformation. They've been obstructing climate action around the world, including in the EU and the United States. So let's get to the root cause of the problem here and not get distracted by these geopolitical zero-sum kind of calculations, because meanwhile, we're on a trajectory for up to 2.9 degrees Celsius of global warming. That is a planet where no one can thrive, no economy can thrive, ecosystems will be dying, people will be under so much stress. So I really think this narrow view, being trapped in this narrow view, is what is keeping us from the kinds of big changes that need to happen very quickly if we're going to meet the goals of the Paris Agreement and deliver for people on the front lines of this crisis.
Thank you so much for joining us. Dr. Rachel Cleetus joining us there from COP30 in Belém in Brazil. We really appreciate your time. I'm letting you go now because I know that you've got your next appointment and next thing to run to. Great conversation. We look forward to speaking to you again soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it.
Louise, just to pick up then on what we were talking about, she was very, very clear that the fossil fuel industry in the United States is basically, she said, appeared to be saying controlling the Trump administration, but also that that the US, it's forced them on a decour or away from what they've been doing with clean tech and renewable energy. What were your takeaways from what she was saying?
I mean, I think it's really positive to look beyond the US, as she was saying. I mean, the US itself, we know what we're looking at now. President Trump has made it very clear about how he feels about climate change and their way forward when it comes to renewables or not backing renewables in this case. But what Rachel then was saying about, outside of the US and the movement towards, multilateralism and moving forward with renewables and cutting emissions, regardless of what the US is doing, is really important. And making sure that those negotiations can go forward even without the influence or the backing from the US. But as she said as well, like on the ground, it is super important that people are able to get energy access, and renewables can offer a path forward that fossil fuels just cannot. Think of remote areas in sub-Saharan Africa, for example. Solar panels are going to be much more efficient in getting power to people than trying to put in lines from a coal-fired power plant, for example.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing I did want to just ask you when we were talking about, the negotiations, and this is, we've had 30 years of talks, let's be frank about it, and yet we're still talking, and still we haven't managed to succeed in bringing down temperatures fossil fuels, we're saying now, have possibly peaked, despite what we're seeing with China and with the United States. But still, we're still so far off track, aren't we?
Yes, obviously we are. Temperatures are still set to rise so much higher than we need them to. And like I said before, that is going to have a huge impact in terms of extreme weather events and cost many, many lives. Saying that, the Paris Agreement, which was this agreement that was put in place by nations back in 2015, that promised to try to keep temperatures well below 2 degrees Celsius, pursuing efforts to keep it down to 1.5. Without this agreement, we were looking at a temperature rise of around 4 degrees.
Yeah.
Now it's, around 2.5, 2.6, something like that. So even though the progress has been slow, and honestly, as a reporter covering this, it feels incredibly frustrating watching countries argue over every comma and every word that they are coming across. But there is movement. And, at the negotiations this year, for example, they are talking about this roadmap away from fossil fuels. This is for a decision that they made 2 years ago to transition away from fossil fuels. And yes, OK, 2 years have passed since then, but there is movement. Trying to get 190 plus countries to agree on something, and the climate summits have always been consensus-based, is incredibly difficult. And it's coming slowly. It needs to move faster, no question, but it is coming.
Speaking of transitioning away from fossil fuels, I want you to play maybe a little bit of a mythbuster.
Okay.
Someone is in our chat. They're saying, why is this about fossil fuels versus renewable energy? This person's written, I thought climate was about cutting down emissions. Fossil fuels can still reduce emissions. Yes or no, maybe?
There is this argument about gas, for example. The EU was very focused on gas as a way to lower emissions in comparison with burning coal, for example. So yes, it can be done, but obviously fossil fuels are still a problem, whether it's gas, coal, or oil. Burning them causes emissions, and there are fossil fuels that cause lower emissions and ones that cause higher emissions, but ultimately we have to get off them completely to be able to stop those emissions altogether.
Yeah. You mentioned there, and I mentioned earlier, the EU, the European Union. Where is the EU at the moment in all this?
The problem is that there's some division. Again, we're talking about 27 countries then in the EU, and not all of them agree on how to move forward when it comes to lowering the EU's emissions. Just before the COP conference took place, they were having talks, for example, on how to cut emissions down for a 2040 target. The European Commission had said that it wanted to reduce emissions by 90%, and there was a lot of disagreement about how that would be done, whether it would be done through just, trying to directly cut emissions or whether they were going to use something called carbon credits. So this is the idea that they would pay for a project, for example, in Brazil to protect forest, which then absorbs carbon dioxide. And that's a way to avoid making those direct cuts. And you've seen countries like Hungary and Poland and Slovakia, for example, not wanting to make the direct emissions cuts. And then countries like Germany trying to make it kind of more stable target. So there's a lot of, power play within the EU itself, which has meant that it's not been able to bring kind of climate leadership to the table in the same way that other countries have been able to.
And I saw also that there has been talk about this carbon tax, this EU carbon tax, again has been criticised by many other countries. Can you explain that in very simple language? It's basically, it's a tax, isn't it, to try to stop emitters.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I mean, there are different kinds of taxes that they're talking about. They're talking about a carbon border adjustment mechanism, for example.
That's, yes, the CBAM. I was just Googling that. Yeah, and funny you just mentioned the handy acronym CBAM.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that would kind of put a tax on, I'm not sure if you call it a tax or a levy, maybe something different. I'm not quite sure about that. But anyway, it would tax imports from other countries where the carbon emissions are higher than they would be if something was produced in the EU, for example. Mm-hmm. So they are looking at those kinds of mechanisms to try to also influence other countries to cut their carbon emissions.
I just posted it in the chat. So if anyone is interested to get their, tax on, they can read all about CBAM.
Thank you. Very good.
I assume that's what we call it. I don't know.
I just wanted to ask you quickly again about China, because you wrote a piece yourself, which Dustin either has or will be putting into the chat as well.
I did share that, yes.
Oh, he shared it already, where you were describing China as a reluctant leader when it came to clean energy, renewables, because of the fact that the US at the moment seems to have removed itself, certainly from the leadership or the diplomacy around all this. What do you mean by a reluctant leader? Is this a position that they don't actually want to be in, or because? Just if we're talking about COP30, so about the conference that's going on at the moment, the UN climate conference, they apparently have the largest pavilion. So of all the different countries that are there, the Chinese one is the largest. So, and everybody's been talking about them as being the presence that is there, and everybody wants to try to talk and be somewhere near that pavilion. So how much are they enjoying that, or is it something that they would rather step away from?
I mean, to be clear, it's quite difficult to have any interaction with the Chinese authorities themselves. Our reporters on the ground in Belém have been trying to get interviews with negotiators and leaders there, and it's just not happening. They are not very vocal about how they want to move forward. But the experts that I spoke to as I was putting together the article described China as not necessarily wanting to step into an overt leadership position and not wanting to kind of take the place of the US, which could have been described as a leader before. Instead, these experts were saying that China is happier kind of setting an example by, trying to transition its economy away from fossil fuels and trying to focus on renewables instead. Saying that, obviously, they get a lot of power by being in the position that they're in. I mean, we've spoken about the economic power that they are gathering from investing so heavily in renewables, but there's also this geopolitical soft power. So, they have a lot of influence in emerging countries, for example, setting up factories, putting in place solar panels and things like this. They get a lot of diplomatic kind of back and forth as a result of that. And obviously that puts them in a very advantageous position, a position that arguably the US is at the moment taking itself out of.
Yeah. There's a question that's been bugging me posted by Davos, and he's written, what are the top 5 polluting countries ranked? And I've spent the last little while trying to find some reliable data on that. And it's really difficult to find.
Have you found it? Well, we know the top 2 already.
We know the top 2, China and the
United
US.
States.
It says India, Russia, Japan after that one source that I have. But of course, then we lump the EU together as a block. Where does that fit in?
Yeah, the EU would be among the top 5 as well
Yeah.
if we were going to rank it in that way. So they're definitely up there. I mean, we also can't forget that when we're talking about the biggest emitters now, obviously hugely important that China is up there, and they need to do more, arguably, than the rest of the world to reduce quickly to make an impact. But looking at the Western world, I mean, the US is the biggest historical emitter. So that means they are the country that has put most carbon dioxide into the atmosphere over any other country. But, you know, I mean, the UK, for example, is pretty low now on the polluting ranking list, but was also very influential in starting with fossil fuels during the Industrial Revolution.
Yes, and North Sea oil, etc.
Exactly, and the EU as well. So.
Thank you. Well, that's quite good. Do you think it is reliable?
I think it's fairly reliable. Obviously, when you're searching, you're also getting results for the world's most polluted countries, and that's vastly different to polluting. And of course, a lot of those countries are the ones adversely affected by climate change, the ones who usually have the least to do with it, the countries that least contribute to it. So lots of different results there when you search.
I wanted to just end with one last question for you, which is this. The outlook for the future then, not in terms of climate change, but in terms of energy sources. We've possibly got something that we can show, I think, for this.
Yes.
But where do you see it going in terms of renewables versus fossil fuels? Do you think that we have reached the peak when it comes to fossil fuels, despite, again, I've said it before, despite what China's doing, despite what the US is doing, despite what India's doing, and other countries as well? Will we now see, do you think, renewable energy on the up and fossil fuel on the down?
I'm not sure about when it should peak kind of logistically in terms of when we would see the highest amount of fossil fuels being used. But I feel like, you know, we have reached a peak politically. The fact that we are seeing, 80 plus countries calling for a clear map away from fossil fuels, that this is now being brought into these climate summits. And just to clarify, before 2 years ago in Dubai, fossil fuels as a term had never made it into one of the negotiating decisions from one of the climate summits. So we are seeing that countries are trying to not only increase their domestic pledges, and of course they need to do more there, but there is so much more political will to look at completely phasing out fossil fuels. Not in all countries. Not all countries are in favour of that, but it's ever more. And that is hugely important because, you know, once all of these nations and all of these leaders say we will not use fossil fuels anymore, then, you know, it starts the path to exactly what is needed in terms of cutting emissions.
We have an interesting graph from the International Energy Agency, if we can bring that up, and it seems to be like a kind of interesting point around the mid-2030s where solar and coal, so coal is on its way down, solar is on its way up. Yeah, I'll try and zoom in a little bit.
We were laughing about the fact that coal in this graph is in green.
Exactly, so we need to talk to the IEA about their colour choice because coal's green, solar is blue, nuclear is yellow. So, so it does seem that sort of in the next at least decade we're going to see a lot of interesting changes when it comes to electricity generation and what is the source of that.
And I guess if it is so much cheaper, it's a no-brainer for people.
Yeah, I mean, it's cheaper. As I've said before, the investment opportunities for it, the growth in terms of the economy and everything. I mean, there's always this argument about why countries like China are doing this. And, you know, that morally they are not invested. It's just about money. And the question is, like, does that matter at this point, as long as that step is being made? And economically, it is clear that renewables are the future.
Great. Thank you so much, Louise. It's been really good having you in the studio with us. Oh, Dustin's got something.
I have one. I promised one more question. I will ask one more question from the chat, so I'm going to ask it now. Louise, the EU, I'm reading the question from Be Real now. The EU is going to spend over 800 billion on defense. How much, how about climate financing? Do you know about any plans to increase climate financing in the EU right now?
I don't know about overall EU financing, but I do know that it's been a question within Germany, for example, in the budget. Yeah, I mean, climate financing is always a difficult thing to talk about. There is a lot of argument, for example, about the cost of living and how much industrialized countries want to contribute to moving away from fossil, or helping other countries move away from fossil fuels, versus putting the money into their own domestic budgets. So it's complicated, and unfortunately, I mean, this was a decision last year actually to increase climate financing to 300 billion by 2035. Whether industrialized countries are going to step up and do that or not is still a question being negotiated at this COP and probably beyond as well.
Yeah. Gotcha. And one less, maybe a little bit less serious one. I thought from Angel, I think, is the user. She's basically asking, do you think that we will find a way to use alternative energy before all the oil in the world runs out?
All I can say is I hope so.
All right.
Thank you so much, Louise. We really appreciate it.
Thanks.
It's been great to have you. And Dustin, we had a poll right at the beginning. I'm very interested to know what the results were on that.
Yes. So the result of the poll, the question we asked you guys was, how do you feel about China as a climate leader? And I'm going to start from the lowest value, work my way up to the highest. The lowest value is 11% of you guys thought the US needs to be involved. 20% answered with, they're still the biggest polluter. 22% said...
China, you mean? So we're talking about China is still the biggest polluter,
yes.
yep.
And 22% said we shouldn't depend on China. And 47%, so the most of all of you, almost half, said, I'm glad that they are stepping up, that China is stepping up.
Very
As
interesting.
Louise says, it doesn't matter why they're stepping up as long as they're stepping up, right? So
Yeah. Great. Thank you very much, Dustin. Really good conversation, I thought. I feel like I learnt a lot, and I hope that you did too. Thank you very much for being with us. Thank you for all your comments and your questions in the chat. We always appreciate you being with us and taking the time. So I hope that you also found that very informative as we go forward and see what happens at the end of these negotiations and, of course, in the future.
thanks so much. And just a reminder, we're going to put up next week's topic a day before the stream starts, so on Tuesday, and that way you can weigh in on our community post and give us an idea before the stream starts of what your thoughts are on the topic, whatever that may be. We haven't decided yet, but we'll let you know next Tuesday. Thanks so much.
See you soon. Bye-bye.